History Chronicles presents a moment when the fate of Europe hung by a thread, when one of the world's most powerful empires stood at the gates of a city that had defied centuries of conquest. In the summer of 1683, Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire, stood alone against the might of the Ottoman war machine, over 150,000 soldiers strong. But just when all hope seemed lost, salvation came thundering over the hills, led by a king, a cross, and a cavalry so fierce, their legend still echoes through time. This is the story of the Siege of Vienna and the cavalry charge that saved Western civilization. In the second half of the 17th century, Europe stood at a crossroads. The Ottoman Empire, once the undisputed power of the Mediterranean, had turned its gaze westward toward the heart of Christendom. By the time of the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683, the Ottomans had been steadily advancing through Eastern Europe for over a century, their reach extending deep into the heart of the continent. At their peak, the Ottomans controlled vast swaths of land, from the Middle East to the Balkans, and were poised to dominate the rest of Europe. Suleiman the Magnificent, in the mid-1500s, had pushed as far as Vienna before his death, but by the late 1600s, the Ottomans, led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, were determined to finish what they had started. The Habsburgs, the royal family that ruled Austria and large parts of Central Europe, were the Ottomans' primary adversaries. Vienna, the Habsburg capital, was considered the last bastion of Christian Europe in the face of an overwhelming Ottoman tide. The Ottoman strategy was clear. If they could conquer Vienna, they would break the backbone of the Habsburg Empire, and with it, open the doors to the rest of Europe. But Vienna wasn't just another city. It was the cultural and political heart of Central Europe, a symbol of resilience and strength. As the Ottomans gathered their forces on the outskirts of the city in the summer of 1683, the fate of the continent hung in the balance. Kara Mustafa Pasha, the ambitious Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, was determined to make Vienna his prize. By the summer of 1683, he had gathered an immense army, numbering between 150,000 to 200,000 men, including elite Janissary infantry, fearsome cavalry, and artillery capable of laying siege to the city's thick walls. The sheer size and strength of this force left the defenders with little hope of success. Kara Mustafa's plan was straightforward: starve Vienna into submission. By surrounding the city and cutting off all access to supplies, he hoped to force the defenders to surrender without a fight. The Ottoman siege army brought with it not just soldiers, but also engineers and artillery experts who began battering the city's defenses with cannon fire. The city, though well fortified, was vulnerable, trapped between its walls and the encroaching Ottoman forces. Inside Vienna, Emperor Leopold I and his commanders knew the situation was grim. They had no choice but to hold out, hoping for a miracle, and waiting for the arrival of reinforcements that seemed far too distant. The city was filled with anxiety and morale was sinking. But as the days stretched into weeks, they clung to a shred of hope that help might come from the west. As the siege wore on, the defenders of Vienna faced unimaginable hardships. Led by Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, the commander of the city's defense, the Habsburgs were not prepared for the sheer scale of the Ottoman assault. Starhemberg, a seasoned veteran of European warfare, had no illusions about the strength of the Ottoman forces. Yet he understood the stakes. The survival of Vienna would mean the survival of Europe and the survival of Christendom. Inside the city, conditions were dire. The food and water supply were dwindling, and the population of Vienna, already a bustling metropolis of over 100,000, was swelling with refugees. The defenders relied on their courage, but even the bravest warriors couldn't fight hunger, disease, and the psychological toll of siege warfare. Starhemberg, seeing his forces stretched thin, made a desperate call for help. Meanwhile, on the other side of Europe, in the Kingdom of Poland, one man heard the cries for help. King Jan III Sobieski, a leader renowned for his military genius and valor, knew that Europe's future was at stake. He understood that if Vienna fell, the Ottomans would not stop. They would sweep through the heart of Europe. Sobieski would have to rally an army, cross the Carpathian Mountains, and save Vienna. Time was running out. As the Polish king Jan III Sobieski prepared his army, he faced an uphill battle of his own. His forces were stretched thin, and many of his troops were coming from Poland, a country already embroiled in conflicts of its own. But Sobieski, undeterred, managed to rally a coalition of Polish, Austrian, and German forces to march to the relief of Vienna. By the first week of September, Sobieski's army, now numbering around 80,000 men, was in motion, racing against time to arrive in Vienna before the Ottomans could break through the city's defenses. The stakes could not have been higher. With each passing day, the city's survival seemed more uncertain. But Sobieski was not just a king, he was a strategist, a warrior, and the leader of one of the most legendary cavalry forces in history, the Polish winged Hussars. These warriors were a symbol of European military might. Cloaked in heavy armor and mounted on swift horses, the winged Hussars were known for their intimidating charge, a thunderous display of power that could break any formation of infantry or cavalry. The winged Hussars were not just known for their fearsome appearance, with their distinctive feathered wings and ornate armor, but also for their unparalleled discipline and effectiveness in battle. They were armed with lances up to 12 feet long, and they charged with such force that they could tear through enemy lines like a hot knife through butter. It was this cavalry, led by Sobieski himself, that would turn the tide of the battle. As Sobieski's army approached Vienna, the Ottomans, confident in their encirclement, had no idea what was coming. They had been fighting a siege for weeks, but they had no answer for the fury of the winged Hussars. The day of battle had arrived, and as Sobieski's army moved into position, the siege around Vienna intensified. The defenders within the city walls knew they could hold out no longer. The fate of the city, and indeed the future of Europe, hung on the thinnest of threads. Starhemberg, having fought for weeks, was exhausted but resolute. The outer perimeter was under constant bombardment, and the defenders were reduced to fighting with whatever meager supplies they could scrape together. The Ottoman forces had grown confident. The siege had been methodical, and it seemed like only a matter of time before Vienna would fall. But then, on the morning of September 12th, the rumble of hooves broke the silence. King Jan III Sobieski and his Polish winged Hussars had arrived at the last possible moment. The Ottoman troops were caught completely off guard by the arrival of Sobieski's army. The initial panic among the Ottomans was palpable, but the true devastation would come when Sobieski unleashed the full fury of his winged Hussars. The winged Hussars, known for their devastating charges, rode into battle with their long lances, heavily armored horses, and feathered wings, creating a terrifying spectacle that struck fear into the Ottoman lines. The sound of their charge, the thundering hooves and the crash of metal, was enough to rattle even the steeliest of hearts. As they surged forward, they created a wave of terror among the Ottoman ranks. The Ottoman janissaries, famed for their discipline and fierceness, faltered for the first time. The cavalry charges mashed into their lines, and the Ottomans found themselves unable to regroup in time. It was not just the force of the charge that broke the Ottomans, but the psychological impact. The sight of thousands of Polish cavalry coming at them, seemingly invincible, shattered their confidence. The Ottomans had underestimated the power of Polish cavalry, and this miscalculation would cost them dearly. As the Hussars tore through the Ottoman infantry, breaking their lines, Kara Mustafa's plan to encircle and destroy Vienna crumbled. The cavalry charge was a turning point. The Ottomans had not just been outflanked, they had been overwhelmed by sheer force and precision. In moments, panic spread through their ranks, and soon the Ottoman forces began retreating. Sobieski's cavalry, unrelenting in their pursuit, forced them into a rout. The once proud Ottoman army, so sure of victory, was now fleeing in disarray. The Ottoman defeat at the Battle of Vienna was decisive. The city had been saved, and Europe had been preserved from Ottoman domination. Sobieski's victory was a military triumph, but it was also a symbolic one. It marked the beginning of the end for Ottoman expansion into Europe. The Habsburg Empire would continue to grow, and the Ottoman Empire would begin its slow retreat from the European continent. The aftermath of the battle was profound, not only for the immediate defenders of Vienna, but for the entire European continent. As news of Sobieski's victory spread across Europe, the Ottoman Empire found itself on the defensive for the first time in over a century. The Siege of Vienna marked the end of Ottoman expansion into Europe, and from that day forward, the Ottomans would be forced to gradually retreat from the territories they had once dominated. For Emperor Leopold I, the victory at Vienna was a godsend. He had narrowly avoided the fall of his capital and the destruction of his empire. However, the victory also marked a shift in the balance of power in Europe. The Habsburgs, who had been struggling against the Ottoman threat for decades, now found themselves in a position of strength. Vienna had been saved, and the Habsburgs would now take the lead in pushing the Ottomans out of Europe. The Holy League, the alliance of Catholic powers formed to defend Europe against the Ottoman threat, was now more united than ever. Sobieski, the hero of the hour, had proven that a united front against the Ottoman Empire could indeed lead to victory. Poland, whose involvement had been crucial to the victory, was recognized across Europe for its role in preserving the continent's future. Sobieski's leadership in the Battle of Vienna made him an enduring hero, both in Poland and across Christian Europe. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat was catastrophic. While they would remain a powerful force for some years, the loss at Vienna would mark the beginning of a gradual decline. The Ottoman Empire had overextended itself in its attempts to conquer Europe, and this defeat demonstrated the limits of its power. Despite its size and wealth, the Ottomans could not maintain their hold over European territories forever. The Siege of Vienna was the beginning of the end for Ottoman influence in Europe. The immediate consequences were evident. The Habsburgs began a series of victories in the years following the Battle of Vienna. They regained much of the territory that had been lost to the Ottomans, pushing them out of Hungary and eventually reaching the Ottoman heartland in the Balkans. The victory at Vienna had set the stage for the Treaty of Karlowitz, 1699, which saw the Ottomans cede vast territories to the Habsburgs, marking the official end of the Ottoman expansion into Europe. The legacy of the Siege of Vienna and Sobieski's winged hussars would echo through history. The heroic charge of the winged hussars became legendary, symbolizing the courage and power of Poland and its leadership in saving Europe from Ottoman domination. But the legacy of the charge didn't stop there. It inspired countless generations, including a British author whose work would define an entire literary genre, J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien, a historian and scholar of medieval Europe, was deeply influenced by the stories of cavalry charges and the battles of old. In The Lord of the Rings, the charge of the Rohirrim, the climactic moment when the riders of Rohan charged to the rescue of Minas Tirith, has striking parallels to the charge of the winged hussars at Vienna. Just as the hussars broke through the Ottoman lines in a moment of desperation and triumph, so too did the Rohirrim change the tide of battle with their heroic charge. The winged hussars' legendary charge became an archetype of cavalry in literature and history, shaping Tolkien's view of warfare and heroism. The Battle of Vienna also had a profound influence on military tactics and the development of cavalry warfare in Europe. The effectiveness of the Hussars in that battle was studied by military leaders for generations, and the Polish cavalry became an enduring symbol of speed, precision, and force. The Siege of Vienna in 1683 stands as one of the most defining moments in European history. It was a battle for the survival of Europe, a victory that preserved not only the Habsburg Empire, but also the very identity of Christian Europe in the face of overwhelming Ottoman aggression. King Jan III Sobieski and his winged Hussars became immortalized not just in Polish history, but across the continent, embodying the power of cavalry and the courage of leaders in times of crisis. The Ottoman defeat at Vienna marked a pivotal turning point as the Ottomans began their long retreat from Europe. For the Habsburgs, the victory meant the consolidation of their power and the beginning of a new phase in European geopolitics. And for the world of literature, the heroic charge of the winged Hussars lives on, inspiring modern-day writers, artists, and military historians alike. The Battle of Vienna and the charge that saved the city will continue to echo throughout history as a symbol of resilience, heroism, and the triumph of unity over adversity. So the next time you think about epic cavalry charges or the fate of civilizations hanging by a thread, remember the charge of the winged Hussars at the Siege of Vienna and the turning point that forever shaped the course of European history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like and subscribe to History Chronicles for more fascinating stories from the past. Drop a comment below and let us know which battles, historical events, or times in history you'd like to explore next. Your thoughts and feedback are always welcome. Until next time, remember, history is written by those who dare to shape it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next journey through time.